Good evening. Welcome to Eye on Bethel. I'm Paul Zetkowski, your host for tonight's program. I'm sure many of you are looking around town and saying, yes, it's election time. I'm seeing those signs, and in the mail I'm getting the bibliographies, I'm getting the candidates' issues. It's good, believe me, because on November 3rd, each one of us are going to be making a decision. We're going to be going to Berry School, the Municipal Center, Stony Hill Fire Department, and whatever we check off for a particular candidate, this is the direction that board or commission is going to be taken for the next 2 years. It's an awesome responsibility, because basically it affects each and every one of us. I don't need to tell everybody in the audience, the viewing audience tonight, that we're in an economic recession. I'm sure you've heard this, and I've even heard in some of the economic indicators that they're saying this is the big recession. Big recession or not, I know, there's people who are unemployed. And whether or not you're employed or unemployed, it affects all of us. You really have empathy for those who are unemployed looking for a job. And in our town, there is this issue of what is the big issues. Of course, it's taxes, then it's town services, and education. All three are very, very important. There's no question about that, because behind all three, this is how the town is structured. This is how the town has gone forward. The current economic climate really requires leaders who can manage finances with transparency, integrity, and honesty, regardless of their political persuasion. In the past year, you have seen the Republican Board of Finance monitor finances during a current economic recession without costs to the taxpayer. They were on top of it early in January. There was shortfalls. They took the necessary action. In the past year, we've seen the Republican Board of Finance cautiously, and I underscore that word, say cautiously, construct and deliver a budget for this fiscal year which is nearly zero under this current economic climate. So the question I pose to the viewing audience, when you're going to be selecting Board of Finance candidates, how important is it to have the right individual representing you? This economic recession is not going away. I've heard, you've heard, that current unemployment is like 9.8%, may go up to 10%, and Washington's telling us, well, the end of the tunnel is seen. Well, as long as the unemployment is going up, we've got to be concerned. As some residents have told me, Paul, they said, I'm going to vote as my wallet tells me to vote. And that's very smart, because it's affordability, taxable affordability. And this is what you want as far as your Board of Finance candidates. Tonight I have with us three individuals who I'm sure you're very, very familiar with. Phil Gallagher, I refer to him as our statesman here of Bethel. Phil has served on more, I think you were selectman for about 5 terms.
I took the oath of office for selectman 7 times. 7,
I'll never meet it. Next I have Bill Kingston, and I'm sure everybody knows Bill Kingston. Bill is currently chairman of the Board of Education. He's making a switch, coming over to finance, and I can understand that, because I was at one time in his particular position as far as employment, being in the chemistry field. He understands budgets. I remember those budgets. So he's going to come here and take a look at the total town now. And lastly, but not least, I have Tim Draper here. And Tim is a lifelong resident. Many of you know Tim because of Little League and baseball, I believe, and football. And Tim, why don't we just start with you? I want to say, tell us something about yourself, since you're the new guy on the block here.
Sure, Paul. My name's Tim Draper. Some of you know me, some of you won't. Lifelong resident of Bethel. I grew up in Stony Hill. I married a lifelong resident of Bethel, my wife, Laurel Draper now. He used to be Laurel Allen. She grew up downtown. Own 2 businesses in town, T&M Lawn and Landscape. You may have seen my trucks around town. and T-Drap LLC, which is a building company. We've built some houses around town here, and my son, Ethan, who's 13, he's in 8th grade in the middle school. So I kind of know what's going on with that. I've been coaching for the last 7-8 years, both baseball and football. This will be my last year coaching him, so I'm looking to spend a little more time working with the town on some of the budget issues. I see some good things, some bad things, and I really want to get a little bit more into it. I've got a good take on financial things. As Paul was saying, we're in tough economic times. I still have 2 businesses that are running pretty strong, and I think a little bit of that goes a long way, just the smarts of it. So that's pretty much it that I can, that's a little bit about me in a nutshell, and we're just going to have some conversation about finances.
Great.
So.
Next we're going to turn to Bill Kingston. Now, Bill Kingston and we go back a few years. We always exchange a little bit about chemistry, but Bill, tell us about yourself.
Well, I've been a resident of Bethel for just about 24 years. Married with 1 child who's 30, so not in the schools. I've enjoyed the last 4 years serving on the Board of Education and the last 2 years being chairman. And I've got an insight into that end of how the town works. I'm interested in joining the Board of Finance because I have, in addition to a chemistry degree, I do have an MBA in finance, and I'd like to be able to put those skills to use on behalf of the town of Bethel. Yep. And I think it's a good opportunity. I love this town.
I want to interject something here. Bill Kingston, being chairman of the Board of Education, for the last 2 years, I believe you've been chairman, correct? Yes. And, it's this Republican team effort. And he's done something which is historical. And the historical thing is that at the end of the fiscal year, you return back to the town $142,000. And I'd like to talk to the audience about that. Have you ever heard the Board of Ed ever returning that type of amount of money? Why? Good fiscal prudent management. Bill speaks about his background in finance. He used it with his fellow board members, and if you take a look at the results of education, they're up, and the town got money back. Good job, Bill.
Thank you.
Welcome to Board of Finance. Lastly, I want to talk to Phil Gallagher. Phil and I are same age category here. Phil.
39 years old.
30, likewise. Both of us. Phil, tell us a little bit about your background, because I know you've been in town government for a long time.
I've been a lifelong resident of Bethel.
Class of 1956, right?
That's correct. Played on the last 6-man football team, Bethel High School, and I got a scar over my eye to prove it. I have 5 children. My wife Kitty and I raised 5 children in Bethel. We have 10 grandchildren. And you asked me about being a selectman before. I've also been on the Board of Tax Review or Board of Assessment Review, I guess it's called now. And this is my second go-around on the Board of Finance.
You're presently chairman.
Yeah, chairman, and I was also the first chairman 20 years ago who was not a first selectman. Prior to charter change in I think it was 87 or 8, the first selectman always served as the chairman of the Board of Finance. I've taken the oath of office a total of 10 times. There was a couple other times I wanted to take it, but the voters had different ideas. So.
Anyways, that's complimentary, Phil. Phil, let me start with you, because I've always felt that, we have new people coming into town. They're not accustomed to so-called the type of government that we do have. And really, when you take a look at it, at all of our boards and commissions, the fundamental thing is that the Board of Finance really establishes the budget. I know the Board of Selectmen reviews it jointly with the Board of Finance, and the Board of Selectmen gives a suggested budget to the Board of Finance, but the Board of Finance is the ultimate.
That's correct. We have the final recommendation that goes before the town meeting and ultimately the voters of Bethel in the May referendum. And the budget process, as we like to call it, starts in January, usually, with the different boards and commissions and town departments submitting their budgets. Actually, there's two parts to it. Yeah, if you break the budget down, the top 5 budget categories are: the first is the education budget, the second is police budget, the third is the highway, fourth is the park and rec, and the fifth is the library. And 4 of 5 of those are put together. Their budgets are put together by 2 elected boards, like the Board of Education, which Bill was chairman of, and the Police Commission. And then you'll have 2 appointed boards, appointed by the Board of Selectmen, Park and Rec Board, and the Library Board. And I've always maintained that if those boards have to be their own boards of finance, and they should be balanced, and which I think we saw a very good example the last couple of years with Bill Kingston, chairman, and Larry Kravis, vice chairman of the Board of Education. They have to be balanced in the sense that they're on those boards. They're on the library board because they're interested in the library, the Board of Ed because they're interested in the education. They're on the Police Commission because they're interested in the police and the Park and Rec and so forth. But they have to be balanced and not just on there to be lobbyists for those departments, because they have to be concerned about the overall needs of the town. And if they do that, you know, it makes the budget process a lot easier. And we had this the last couple of years with the Board of Education, which is by far the biggest board, with
right.
Larry and Bill's leadership. That they have a much better record in balance than Larry's opponent for first election when he was chairman, Mr. Knickerbocker. He hasn't shown, if you examine his record, the same type of balance that these 2 gentlemen have in overseeing the Board of Ed with an eye on what the rest of the town needs as well.
Right.
And that's a very important thing.
Exactly.
The other accounts, the highway account and the other town departments, they're usually the purview and the submission of the first selectman and the town controller.
Right.
You know, they look at those. But that's how the budget process starts, and then we have hearings, as you know, joint hearings with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance in February. And then the Board of Selectmen makes a recommendation, and that's all it is, a recommendation to the Finance Board in early March, and then we discuss it, and we make an initial recommendation for a public hearing either in late March or early April. And we listen to what the people have to say, and then we put up a budget for the town meeting and then ultimately the referendum. Now, I've heard people say, and in fact we had a former first selectman from the opposite party in one of our meetings this year, just pass the budget through. You know, that's not what people. If you do that, you don't need a Board of Finance.
That's correct.
The people of Bethel are busy. You know, their voters are busy, and they expect the Board of Finance to have some certain amount of expertise to examine the budget and make recommendations to the voters. And that's basically what we do for the town meeting and ultimately the referendum. And if it goes down as it did 2 years ago, then we revise it. You, for instance, participated in a very important step which was controversial in the splitting the budget 2 years ago.
Right, I remember introducing that.
And some people said, well, that's going to be detrimental to the education budget. Well, it hasn't turned out that way at all. You know, and it also has enabled the Board of Finance to focus in on the 2 parts of the budget. And, for instance, this year was with the budget passed on the first outing, but 2 years ago we had three referendums before it passed. And the Board of Finance took into consideration how the people voted on each side of the budget. And actually the Board of Education budget, percentage-wise, fared better than the town side because they had done a little bit better with the voters. So you know, you have Bill and Tim to do some talking too, but basically that's how we approach the budget process.
Bill, let's touch base a little bit what occurred last January, because you were in a financial situation on the Board of Education, and it was, I don't want to put the words in your mouth, but basically a meeting of 2 boards, correct?
Right, and it was a very serious situation. The Board of Finance and the town controller presented very compelling evidence that our tax receipts were down.
We're shortfall, right?
It was a tremendous shortfall, and they asked that the Board of Ed cooperate to the best of our ability in order to cut our existing, not the budget we were going for, but the existing budget as much as possible so that we could return money and preserve our bond rating at the end of the year. And Mr. Krabus, Larry Krabus, and I, and the rest of the Republican Board of Education, in cooperation with the school administration, froze things and just pinched pennies all year long in order to come out with a significant dollar amount of surplus to give back to the town, because we felt that we had to keep faith with the Board of Finance and to do our level best not to waste any money and not to do anything optional under the circumstances.
And without harm to the children, too.
Absolutely.
You know, that's a testament in itself, because basically, you know, when you take a look at it, you had fiscal prudent management there. You responded to the Board of Finance. And then when I take a look at the results at the end of the year, you returned money. And lastly, the children, they did well.
The test scores, I don't want to get off.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about Board of Ed here.
Test scores were absolutely fantastic, and it's a cooperative effort between Board of Ed and the school administration.
And it's nothing but, I always refer to this as simple communication. You know, you dismiss your political affiliations and you say, okay, let's do what's good for the town. That's where I'm going to touch with you a little bit, Tim. You got the talk on the street, okay? You know, because you're there every day with the people, and I would assume, and tell me, I don't like using that word assume, but what's the talk on the street about the taxability? Okay, are people hurting?
People are hurting, absolutely. My business this year, 2009, is going to be down probably about 40%, okay? And people are just cutting back. That's on the service part. Most of what I do is service work. And you'll see people, even if they don't just discontinue service, they'll cut back on the service they have. So it comes down to people are being strangled. Not, you know, unemployment is almost at 10%. So there's people that I know that are unemployed. Most people just aren't sure if they're going to have a job next week. A lot of people live paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
You know, taxes are a big thing. You know, I bought my first house in 1991 in Bethel. I graduated high school in 1985, and I bought my house 7 years later. And I remember the budget was about $28 or $29 million, and I'm sure it's double that right now. I don't remember exactly what it is, to tell you the truth. But I felt sorry for people like my parents. You know, my father passed away a few years. My stepmother just moved out of town. I grew up on Castle Hill, and I had to buy the house from her because she just couldn't afford to pay the taxes on the house by herself. And there's a lot of people that, my in-laws, they're both retired now. So you got to look at every little place that you can save, you know, and there's a lot of stuff. I don't want to get into it too deeply, but there's a lot of places I can see things can be cut, you know, and I hate, you know, cutting people, but, you know, and cutting jobs or anything, but just because, I would have to say, just because, you know, you're a town or a state employee doesn't mandate that you're guaranteed the 40 hours. I had a hard time with that. If the work's not there, everybody's got to cut back. You know, that's just one part of it. You know, and I'm probably not going to get a lot of votes because I just said that, but I really don't care. That doesn't bother me. You know, my thing is you got to be fiscally conservative. You know, I am in my business. I didn't let any of my employees go. We're down. I'm taking the cut. The business is taking the cut. I need some new trucks. I'm not buying them. You know, that's the way I look at stuff. People are hurting. You know.
Good. Which? Go ahead, Phil.
No, I just was going to say, picking up on what Tim said. You know, think that the future in Connecticut doesn't look any rosier yet.
Especially when we got a $10 billion.
Not at all. It looks terrible.
But I mean, the news from the state, and we are dependent upon state aid.
Right.
Well, we get much more than some of our neighbors in school aid from the state because we're a poor community. Yet we do very well. On top of that, evidenced by our pupil spending, which is higher than all of our neighbors except Richfield and Reading, because we, in addition to the state aid, we in Bethel have always supported education. And we are dependent on the state aid, which Governor Rell, the educational cost-sharing money, is guaranteed for this budget year and next budget year at flat rate because of this federal stimulus money. But the budget is scary. You don't know what's going to happen after this year because it's scary. The news from the state already. It took them till September to get a budget done,
right?
And there seems to be a lot of smoke and mirrors, and depending on $500,000 or $500 million in savings that they have to discover along the way, and they also have to depend on bonding, to make up for the shortfall this year. They're bonding, and they have to do that next year. Then I read in today's paper, some others may have seen it, that we get money from the 2 casinos, Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, and their revenues are off because it's hard times. People aren't gambling as much, and that's another $50 million that they may lose in this 09-010 budget. We're faced with the high school, the new high school renovation, coming on full bonding on the budget of 11-12.
Right.
Now, but fortunately, with the Board of Finance and the Controller working with the Board of Finance, we've staggered the bond issue on what Barry Carina calls a 2 and 22 setup, so that this coming budget, actually when we're right now, half the interest for the high school for a year is phased in, $400,000. Next year, $800,000, the full interest, but not the principal.
The principal is the following year.
Yeah, because we still have the what we call the new middle school, which is now 20 years old. That goes off in the following year, which is very, very fortunate that it's worked out that way. So people aren't going to get the big hit that was anticipated several years ago with this high school bond issue, because the middle school will go off when the full thing hits. So that's good news. But it's come from sound management.
Right.
And
it's something that, I think, if I take a look at the history of things, like, the budgeting for, like, capital items. Why don't you explain that too, Phil? What we have a 5-year plan?
Yeah, we look at, we try to plan with 5-year plans for the schools and the departments, but in hard times, everything gets thrown out the window. One of my pet peeves is the amount of money we spend to the state of Connecticut. I mentioned that between school aid and, the road grants, we get maybe about $9.5 million in the state of Connecticut. Most of it is in educational cost sharing. But most people don't realize that the town of Bethel, in sales tax and in income taxes, sends almost $30 million to the state of Connecticut. So we only get a third back of what we send up. Now, where does our money go? Well, it goes to the cities, which are, economic basket cases.
Hartford, Waterbury?
Yeah, Hartford, Waterbury, New Haven, Bridgeport, and New London. That's where our money goes.
Fortunately, I've got to say one thing, that, the working relationship that we've got with our state legislators, Senator Tony Boucher, Senator Mike McLaughlin, and Representative David Scribner, has been a good working relationship, that we've gotten some of the benefits of grants and money from the state on that. Let's just touch base on where do you think next year is going to go, Phil?
Well, I think, without being redundant, what I've said is there's so much uncertainty with the state budget, and the state economic condition, that I think all bets are off. We hope for the best, but you have to prepare for the worst. Yeah. And we're set with their school aid for the following year.
For 2 years.
10, 11.
Right.
But after that, I don't know.
See, what I'm nervous on is staying with the status quo and waiting for the, preparing for the worst. Well, that's kind of hard to do it with the status quo, with only spending so much in taxes and not enough money coming in, revenue coming in. Well, we don't know what the revenue is going to be coming in from the state, and that gets a little scary. If you're paying X amount today in taxes, what's it going to be in 2 years? We got to be smart now.
Right.
We got to be smart now for tomorrow.
The fortunate thing within the town itself, when you take a look at the building that's occurring, we've got 2 major developments. One is Toll Brothers on Reservoir, and the other one's going out on Wooster there. That will help out the grand list.
As long as things sell, that's the problem.
Well, we're seeing some of that. I understand there's been some progress over in Reservoir there. Bill, what's some of your concerns on Board of Finance?
Well, I think it's establishing a balance.
Right.
We need to provide certain services on the local level, And I think the balance that needs to be struck by the Board of Finance is to get the best bang for the buck,
right,
and to provide those services in the most efficient manner we possibly can. So that's the orientation that I would bring to the Board of Finance. And certainly, I think that's what Phil and Tim would also agree with.
Try a closing comment with you.
Well, a closing comment would be, you know, if you vote for me, basically, and here it is, a pitch for being voted on, but is you're going to get 24 years of my experience dealing with money. I don't have a great education behind me. I have a Bethel Middle School and Bethel High School education behind me, but I think I turned out
You understand Bethel.
Okay, I understand Bethel. There's still a lot of people in town that live here that I went to school with, which is great, you know. And it's a great town. I love Bethel. This is why
we want to keep it that way.
And this is why I live here. And I like to keep it this way. And most of my family, which I don't have a huge family, but you should say my extended family, all live here because it is a great town.
Great. Phil, wrap it up.
If I'm fortunate enough to get re-elected to Board of Finance, and I would want to continue what I've tried to do the second go-around, is to get as much information for the members of the Board of Finance on the town and school finances.
Which you did.
As I can, yes.
Bill?
Well, I love the town of Bethel. I've lived here now for 24 years, and I want to help to preserve the character of this town because it's, I think, one of the most livable towns in the state of Connecticut. And
well, anyways, we're getting sort of a signal right here that we have a few more minutes, I believe. But I'd like to do sort of a closing comment to the audience right here. You know, ladies and gentlemen, we're in an economic recession. Taxpayers are concerned about affordability, which you've heard here tonight. Bethel really needs leaders who can communicate to all departments, residents, regardless of their political affiliation, and yet at the same time do the best for Bethel. Tonight you've seen what the Republican Party has offered. Positive results. Tonight, a vote for the Republican Board of Finance will provide that zone of comfort, as I refer to. A zone of comfort, perhaps, that your wallet will like. And that's something that we're all concerned about, affordability. So, I strongly urge all of the viewers tonight to vote for Phil Gallagher, Bill Kingston, Tim Draper, and Gary Reagan, row A for Board of Finance. For I and Bethel, good night and God bless.